this is To Be Read, where authors translate Brazil. Today we're going to talk to journalist Marcos Colón, a professor at Arizona State University and founder of the website Amazônia Latitude. His book, The Amazon in Times of War, has just been released in English. Well, Brazil has not been officially at war since World War II. But according to Marcos Colón, the deadly conflict is internal and threatens the survival of a biome with planetary impacts, the Amazon. The book explains the historical violence that colonizers, companies, adventurers, criminals, and even state policies have imposed throughout the decades on the forest and those who live there. The publication then compiles essays published since 2018, showing how the Jair Bolsonaro government strongly fueled the agonizing conflicts and the environmental catastrophe. The current Luiz Inácio da Silva administration, in turn, achieved important results in decreasing deforestation, but is still very far from reversing indigenous extermination and widespread poverty. In 2024, fires in the forest hit record levels and a predatory political agenda advanced in the municipal elections. On top of all this, big mining and infrastructure projects still do not consider that the devastation of the largest tropical forest in the world is approaching the point of no return. Before we talk to him, here is a brief message from our deputy editor, plus a tip. Marcos also produced and directed the documentary features Beyond Fortlandia and Stepping Softly on the Earth. Worth watching.
If you like To Be Read and other special series from the Explaining Brazil podcast, you should subscribe to the Brazilian Report, the journalistic engine behind this podcast. We're a subscription-only website providing valuable insights on Brazil and Latin America. And check us out on YouTube and social media to keep up with all the latest news. If you already subscribe, you can also support us at buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report, where you can become a member in exchange for exclusive content and a shout out on this podcast. So without further ado, a special thank you goes to Cristina Viu, Andrei Novoseltsev, Wild Rice, Jaciara de Oliveira, Carson Allen, Gabriel Luca, Pan Ludwig, Leslie Seal, Mark Hillary, Louise Renz, Erwin Menais, Aaron Berger, Kars Vriesvik, Asdor Townsend, Mela Renacido, Peter Abramson, David Dixon, Jose Ozi Stankovic, Emerging Market Muser, Anna Lund, Peter Suffren, Anderson da Silva, and someone who chose to remain anonymous. Back to the show.
Professor Marcos Colón, thanks so much for joining us on To Be Read. I'm very glad to speak with someone with such necessary and courageous work as yours.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for your audience that are listening to us. And it's a great pleasure to be here with you and to talk about these matters that really is crucial and vital for us today.
For sure. So to start by going straight to the point, what is this war that the Amazon is subjected to? And how did the Jair Bolsonaro government reflect and amplify the historical violence committed to the forest and the Amazonian peoples?
Well, it's a big question, but the bigger war that the Amazon is now, as I have been describing, is the war against life, and mainly the idea that I have tried to bring into the book is this war against life, but it's a capitalism war, in the Amazon that really it's against its people and against its ecosystem, its environment. It's not a simple war. It's a war that I try to make a distinction between fight and war, and in a fight, we have some codes, we have some ethicals somehow, but in a war, we do have is a genocide, it's exploitation, it's destruction, it's the end of everything. And I think Bolsonaro presidency, what they did was they accelerated this war, transforming what Rob Nixon, a professor of mine, used to call slow violence into an open assault, on the forests, indigenous and traditional communities. And it has been not slow anymore, but faster. And the idea is that in this particular war to destroy, or as Ailton Krenak used to say, to eat everything, they are just taking everything from the Amazon as fast as they can. So Jair Bolsonaro presidency, what the policies that they implement during the government, its presidency accelerate and make sure that the destruction happen fast, quick, and the idea was nobody needs to see what's happening. So, and the assault, the open assault on the forest and indigenous lands, traditional communities, has been, I would say, has been very large and at the same time unprecedented, because as you know, today we see the same logical apply in the Amazon, but the guys of quote development, it's a new grammar that we have there, or capitalismo verde, or green capitalism. These are very terminologies, the new grammar that they try to implement. But the idea here behind this is mining, logging, agribusiness, all these issues, all driven by a necrocapitalism system that views the Amazon not as a living entity, but as just as a commodity, as just like a resources for extract to really take everything they can as fast as they can. And what we have now, it's not necessarily a war to save the forest itself, but to save the lives that were there, the indigenous communities, the riparians, the traditional communities over in the region. It's the war. It's even bigger and more crucial and more I would say destructive. And I do believe also that the Amazon, as we have seen, in the last, let's say, 10 years, looking ahead, what's just happened in the last few weeks in the Amazon, the drought, we have the burning, in the region. We send a photographer to documenting. He traveled from Manaus to Rondônia for more than 1,800 kilometers, documenting the whole process of, we call, Dia do Fogo, the burning, which is a tragedy, because what we documented throughout this journey was a sequence of events, which is Minister Marina Silva called environmental genocide. And I think that we need to be very careful with kind of this ongoing wars, because we're going to get to a point that people already said that the Amazon is getting to the point of no return. But the fear that we have is that we cannot wage war, but we can fight. We can fight against this necrocapitalism system, against this capitalism, that eats everything in the Amazon. And that's what we are offering here, is try to recruit, people that can join us in this fight for life, for the life of the system, the Amazon, for the life of the people, for the humans and non-humans as well.
Regarding this current situation, Professor, even under a new federal government, violence continues in the Amazon, as you said. How do you assess the willingness of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and the government as a whole to change this situation? Or, as you put in the book, Is Lula a friend or half a friend?
Well, that's interesting. As you mentioned, the book. This is a very interesting quote that I'm just reading here to your audience. So
Right.
this was an event that we organized back in Oxford, indigenous symposium. We brought Davi Kopenawa, we brought Raoni, Megaron, Joenia, Wapchan in that particular time. This was an event in Oxford. After the event, we went um, to give a letter to Boris Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
In that time, he was the Prime Minister of the UK, and we delivered a letter to Zach Goldsmith. In that particular time, was a Minister of Environment of UK, because in UK is the second biggest buyer of illegal gold comes from the Amazon. That letter was to try to ask them some measures, the parliament to do some initiative to prevent this illegal, purchase of illegal gold from the Amazon.
Yeah.
So after the event, we went to see, and I was in the car myself, Davi Kopenawa, Dario, Fiona Watson, which is the director of Survival International, and a filmmaker.
Mm-hmm.
And we were driving through the street
What a
of
car.
London. Yeah, and that was in February 2020, the end of the month. I think beginning of the month. I find myself traveling with Davi Kopenawa. I'm reading from the book, and his son Dario, Survive International director Fiona Watson, and the Belgian filmmaker Peter van Wecker.
Mm-hmm.
And about, who was producing a film Holding Up the Sky with Davi Kopenawa 2023.
Yeah.
About the Yanomami struggles, against the miners in the Yanomami land. Mm-hmm. During the journey through the London streets, Peter turned to Davi and asked, "Is Lula a friend of indigenous peoples?" So what happened in the scene is that he asked the question to Davi, and we drive into the streets of London, and Davi was very quiet. And we did not know if he's going to reply or not and what he's going to say. And then after a long pause, Davi then replied, "He's a half friend." And to your question, I think there is right now a very difficult moment for the President Lula because the marco temporal, it's still pending. Now there is this the whole situation with the STF, the Supreme Court in Brazil, the Minister Gilmar Mendes, who is trying to put together in this conciliatory room to decide whether they should allow miners to get mining into the indigenous land territory. So the situation is because the Lula came to office with the support of the indigenous communities, with the idea to fight for the marco temporal demarcation, and at this point we don't have that. Mm-hmm. So the situation is crucial, and the fear is that we do not know what's going to happen in 2 years, and what happens if Lula leaves the government, and what's going to happen with that. So the fear right now is that we really need to have a full friend on behalf of the indigenous communities. Mm-hmm. And Lula needs to show that, for and foremost, he needs to, to come up to terms and fight for that. We know that there is a difficult moment, a difficult situation where, as we know, the Centrão, this conglomerate of, small parties, they are controlling the agenda of the government in the parliament. So what we have is a difficult, intricate situation for him, but we expect more. The indigenous gave all the support they could and they can to Lula, and now is the time. And to Davi Kopenawa's quote, "Is Lula have friend?" I wanted to believe that he is a full friend. Mm-hmm. I wanted to believe that he's on the side of the indigenous community. He's on the right side of the history. And the indigenous communities, more than any time in this particular the existence, they need his support. They need Lula's support to fight for them. to fight for what is right. And but I think at this particular point, the situation is political, yes, but also we need to do more. And if there is international pressure pushing the governments to act more, to do more, we need to join forces with the indigenous communities. They are right now being attacked, being their land has been invaded. There is this non-stop you know um, carry on of activities in try to take their land, invaded, they're killing indigenous, killing those that protecting their land. So yes, we need a full friend. You don't need a half friend.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a significant portion of the products illegally extracted from the Amazon, such as gold and wood, are exported, as you've already investigated in depth. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about how Brazil and foreign governments act or fail to act to combat this type of trade.
This issue is political for and foremost. Of course, we have different organizations that trace, the shipping of soybean, that goes from, especially from Brazil, to ended up in China, or even gold. There is different organizations that has been helping to track and to trace this, this damage that we have, every day in the Amazonian life. Um, the only solution, the only is political. It's what the government can do in order to do his job. But also we have to be very clear here. The government is not doing their job in protect the forest.
Mm-hmm.
The government is not doing their job to really protect the indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm.
The government has creating this big void, and that's why we have these problems. Besides to be a political issue, you have also a lack of the government to really provide the indigenous communities the protection and the care they need.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you see what Ibama is facing right now. You have a crisis in Ibama. Ibama cannot do 2 or 3 operations simultaneously because they don't have enough people to do that. So
IBAMA, to
that's
explain, is our environmental agency, federal agency.
correct. So Ibama, it's the government agency that really cares and protect the environment for the indigenous communities. But when you don't have that, when you don't have the government fulfill their responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
the basic responsibility, I mean, on top of that, you have this political attacks, this political agenda from this kind of like center, group of politicians that are advocating for mining, advocating for agribusiness.
Mm-hmm.
So on top of that, what you have is a catastrophe. I think that lots of initiatives has been taking place in Europe, especially the European Union has been trying to pass laws, regulations, but as we have been witnessed recently, um, most of those companies, European companies, there are have very big interest in the region.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh, there is a lot to be done internationally speaking, because when as I was saying during my visit to some of the colleges, is was how much we need students, people that can fight inside of those European countries to
Mm-hmm.
protect, to be watching what's going on with those companies that had direct interest in exploitation of the region. For instance, I don't know if you know, but France is one of the countries has the biggest deposit of gold in the world,
Oh, yeah.
but they don't have one mining. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, but the point is that they have a mining back in Roraima, but that's the big issue. I mean, how can we create a network of watchers that can really be alert, be vigilant to see those companies that are, in many cases, I mean, companies that has been supported by some politicians, and that's, I think, that what we tried to do when we took Davi Kopenawa, we took Raoni Megaron to deliver this letter to the government in UK in that particular time, was in order to try to find some ways in which those governments could create laws that prevent that illegal purchase of gold from the Amazon. But the list goes on. The list is big, and but the needs for more regulation. We have right now the Amazon Fund that was restored because during the government Bolsonaro, it was um, restricted, and was closed. And now we have again, so we should try to give more support, even to create some, policies, to create some kind of instruments that can help to trace and to track, to be more alert about the exploitation in the region. But it's still, there is much more to be done regarding to this particular uh, international, I would say, um, actions, in order to prevent to buy
Uh,
gold or illegal, products from the Amazon.
Still regarding those large companies, you've reported that in addition to illegal activities, violence also permeates activities authorized or even contracted by the Brazilian state, such as the execution of large infrastructure projects. Please explain to us how large companies operating in the Amazon also resort to violent practices.
Well, I mean, my first film was Beyond Fordlandia, which I particularly addressed the idea of how the Amazon was being transformed in a soybean plantation, monoculture of soybean. In that particular film, I addressed specifically Cargill, which is an American company that has legs and arms all over the world. But in the case of Brazil, Cargill, it's the biggest, controller, I would say, of the soybean exporting from Santarém, from that region to to the whole world. Mostly, the soybean from the Amazon goes to China because of the level of contamination and venomous that the soybean carries. Um, so one of the example is, for instance, we have to think about which kind of country wants to have, or which kind of forest we want to the last we can get, because it seems like in a few years we're not going to have much. But there is a law in Brazil called Candi law. So basically, this law is a kind of incentivize the extraction. So basically, this law was established, I think, 1998 or 94, and the law prevents that you can charge taxes for any company that extract products from the Amazon. This company, for instance, they don't pay taxes, but they give a donation for the municipality in order to, which a compensation, but which is, if you think in real terms, numbers, it's about a couple $1,000. Think about the amount of, you know um, you know the amount of products they have been taking from the region. And so I think one of the things Brazil has to revise the Candi law, has to think about what this law was approved. It's, by a lobby, a very strong lobby. We know the lobby for the agribusiness, but we have to think about, this is sustainable in a long term. Can you imagine you come to your house and take everything that you have in your refrigerator and go home and don't pay anything? So the problem that we face here, besides being political, but also is that we need to revise, we need to review these actions, these laws that was approved that give legitimacy for these companies. And then you have Cargill, you have Alcoa, you have Boogie, we have, so many others companies that has been taking advantage of this law. And in the meantime, they have been sacking the whole region, destroying entire communities. for instance, if you wanted to document in those places to map that the level of destruction, they have surveillance, they have cameras everywhere. You cannot go anywhere. And if you wanted to do it, something, I mean, you are a target, and you have to be careful. I remember when I started to film in the Amazon, and for my first film, was a different time. I cannot go to the same area that I did my first film and film again because it's danger, because your life is going to be in peril. So, and those companies, they really know that you're there. When we were filming a scene in Cata's territory in Marabá, I remember that we could not get close to the rail, to the track of the train, because the moment that you get close, they know exactly that you are there.
Mm-hmm.
And that belongs to Vale. And you have to remember, Vale has the larger cargo train in the world. They take that every single day, tons of iron from there, and that is one of the reasons why they want everybody, even the indigenous communities, because the track, they cross the indigenous land, but the indigenous cannot get close to the track. If they get that close, they find out immediately, and they send their security guards in order to chase everybody out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing.
And you
that
feel in danger, really?
We do, because in that particular scene in the film, the scene that we film with Katya close to the train, we have about 10 minutes, and you have to run away because we knew that some of the security guards were coming in our direction.
Mm-hmm.
And we film and just run. So, and the same thing happened in other areas where we have to go for 3 or 4 security checkpoints, and you have to go there, pretend that you're going to do something, but in order to get an image to show that violation, to show the exploitation, the destruction they are doing. So even to documenting, to show the world this, it's a very risk business.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an easy thing to do. We do because we think it is the right thing to do in order to protect the indigenous territory, to protect their lives. But they are over there. Besides us, before us, the indigenous are there. They are in the front line of this, environmental catastrophe, fighting not only from their life, but for us as well, because they're fighting for the forest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the battle, it's a two-way street here. I mean, it's a battle for life, but also it's a battle against a system that allow those companies to do whatever they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what Ford did starting up, as I said in my documentary, Ford in 1927, when he came to the Amazon to extract rubber, and then he didn't work well. I mean, he opened the gate for this process that we see now. And then what you see now, it's a more sophisticated, more advanced, level of capitalism in the region. Those companies, they now have banks. Cargill is a bank. Most of the agricultural family farmers, producers, they have so much debts with those banks to buy machine, to anything that they base. So basically, they are just in their hands. They control their lives. They control their land, their production. So something needs to be done, in part because they don't have assistantship for the government.
Yeah.
And that there is this big void. That's why we are in a very difficult time. If Lula, happened to lose the re-election, in 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
and if he doesn't, finish the job to pass this law to reverse all the problems, the hindrances for Marco Temporal before the end of his first term, now the third term in the case, I mean, we're going to be in a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, because it's of course it's political, but also it's a priority that the government needs to take seriously, and to show to the world that Lula is not only a half friend, but he's a friend,
Mm-hmm.
not a half friend, but he's a full friend.
Mm-hmm.
He's a friend, of the indigenous communities.
Mm-hmm. The book points out several facets of climate denialism that appear even at the United Nations climate conferences, such as band-aid solutions and techno-salvationist fantasies. What do you expect from COP30, which will be held in the state of Pará in 2025?
Well, I don't expect much because all this is a technical bureaucracy, bureaucrats, and you know, of course, I mean, we expect that the people for the first time, and I would say that's going to be the last time. This is going to be the last time we have to do something meaningful to save the Amazon rainforest. I'm going to repeat again. COP30 will be the last chance that we, the Brazilian people, because I am Brazilian, have to do something, the opportunity that we will have to do something meaningful. If you miss the opportunity to show the world what we are facing, I don't know what's going to happen, because what you have seen in the last 3 or 4 weeks is the Amazon people don't have potable water. The Amazon has experienced the most historical droughts in the records. The burning every year it's not only in Latin America, in Brazil, but in Latin America as well. I mean, so the problem that we have now, and COP30 will point out in that direction, there is no more time for blah blah blah. There is no more time for play games with that. So in the meantime, we have all this, this new cartography, this new dynamic of words, bioeconomy. Which is bioeconomy does? I mean, this is just a new grammar that they established, try to create capitalism green, that in practicality, they are doing the same thing, the same level of destruction. But going back to what you just mentioned, I just wanted to point out something here, because that was one of the part of that I just addressed when I was back in Glasgow during the COP there. And one thing is that I mentioned was this cognitive dissonance that we have in chapter 28, which was in that particular time for me was it's just this showdown between blue zone and green zone, who is in the decision table, which sometimes the indigenous are not invited even to that. We have a similar example what happened in Brazil when you have the gather of the Amazonia summit there in Belém. The indigenous we have before the actual event, we have a gather of more than 20,000 indigenous there for a week. The governments arrive and they even salute them, they even greeting them. That was in Belém. So on the point of view of the logistic, Belém, it's a complete no sense. I mean, how in the world the logistic, I mean, that the city, the troubles that the city face, even to hold, I mean, head of state of all the nations going to be in their country, when you don't have hotels even to a simple event of 300 people. I mean, how are we going to, from that particular level of event, how are we going to host all the heads of states that are coming to the event to make decisions there? So it's something that remains to be seen. We do not know what's going to happen. But on that aspect also is concern. But I think we have the responsibility to make a fair discussion, to bring to the table those that are involved, they're in the front line of this debate with the indigenous communities. We cannot do in the COP30 what we did in the Amazonia Summit, that we gathered more than 20,000 indigenous and they were there for a week. And then when the summit starts with the head of states, they don't even invite them to the table to talk to them, to listen to them. So this could not happen in Belém, in COP30. So there is a different kind of alert. So that's why I think this cognitive dissonance we need another action, we need attitude towards towards COP30. If not, and consider that we are going to be in the Amazon, consider going to be in this in the last utopia, as I call, which is the Amazon. Which other place in the world will have more than 300 ethnical groups? Which other place will have more than 275 languages spoken? I mean, we are in this crucial moment in history, and COP30 will be a decisive moment in that. It's a chance to do something different. And as I said here in the end of this book, there is a particular phrase that I said about war, because we started up this conversation talking about war, but I said here, the war is continuous. Sometimes become radical, intense, as was during the case of Bolsonaro government. Sometimes it seems very mild, as in the period that we are current now, with Lula. And it's very interesting to note that, because the indigenous movement in Brazil, they always advance, their fight more when they have an enemy they know very explicit. I mean, during the Bolsonaro government, the indigenous knew that Bolsonaro was an enemy, and they were very aggressive, very, fighting for life. But when you have a mild presidency, and like now, we think Lula is pro-indigenous, and sometimes we feel like we're still a little bit, kind of slow down a little bit. So I think, and history shows us that we advance more when you have a declared enemy. So it's very interesting contrast. But as I said here, mild is not good, and it's simply at least worse. It is at best a corruption of our dreams that leaves us increasingly poor, with less courage to fight for the utopias that keep us going. Degraded by the violence of the last 4 or 6 years, we accept that the boss or the executors, all these companies, all these big, international companies that go in, to sack and devastate in the region, allows us to consume the forest, transform its products, so that we have the people become the commodity. We are at war, and the if we cannot halt it, the war will consume us. And Eliane Brum is a Brazilian journalist, and she said that, open quote, "It is not a war like those of the 20th century, described in the history books at which haunt us to this day. No, not is a war like the one that Putin Russia and has imposed on Ukraine. No, it is much longer and more decisive war, one that will extend beyond our lifetimes. When a war breaks out, one cannot choose whether to live through it or not. The war is already underway. We can only choose between fighting or waiting for the flames to engulf us while we pretend that everything is fine. Fighting along the people's nature of the forest, of the Amazon, in this war has nothing to do with compassion, and goes far beyond ethics. This is a question of survival. We fight for life."
And Professor, to wrap up our conversation, so the solution to that Amazon's war is not easy, of course, but what would you highlight as essential measures for a path to peace?
I don't think we're going to have a time of peace in the Amazon. I hope for, I aim for, but in order for us to achieve that, we need to fight. I think the hope is for every single one of us think about every decision you make every day. When you go to the supermarket, you ask me about which kind of international measures, international actions should you do. We have to think which companies we buy our products. We have to think about I mean, do I want to give up my privileges? Do I want to give up my comfort zone that I have?
Well, Professor Marcos Colón, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and perceptions with us. And I hope we as a society listen to you so we can see the error of our ways and understand the ecocide we are carrying out. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this matter that's so urgent and crucial for today's world. And not only for that, but for the future that comes. As Ailton Krenak said, the future is ancestral, and the future remains and it's on the indigenous by looking back to what they can teach us, to understand their knowledge that they have been living here for more than 19,000 years. And you have a record that in Colombia, in Brazil, 12,000 years. Nobody lives in a place for that amount of year without developing knowledge. The problem that we have is that we don't want to recognize their knowledge. We don't want to give them, at least opportunity to listen to them. You got to stop and listen to the indigenous communities. They still have a lot to teach us. And the point we think so proud of ourselves, we think we don't need to listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we are just continue to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So my goal and my hope in my work is that is an invitation, as I did in my film, Stepping Soft on the Earth, Pisar Suavemente na Terra. Pisar Suavemente na Terra is an invitation, stepping soft on the earth. But once again, it's an invitation. It's your decision to step soft on the earth or not.
Let's do that. Thank you, Professor. Yes. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
If you like To Be Read and the Explaining Brazil podcast, give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your episodes. Or better yet, subscribe to The Brazilian Report, the journalistic engine behind this podcast. We run exclusively on subscriptions, so it's your support that keeps us going and growing. You can also sign up to become a member of our Buy Me a Coffee community by going to buymeacoffee.com/Brazilian Report. By joining, you'll get access to exclusive content and a shout out on this podcast. We at the Brazilian Report have been recognised for our quality, winning several international awards. In April 2024, we were named the best news website in the Americas for a small or local newsroom by the World Association of News Publishers, and we won Best Story at the 2024 Digiday Media Awards for our exposé on an attempt to hack one of Brazil's Supreme Court justices. And to continue doing this work, we need your support, so go to Brazilian.report. Thanks for listening. To Be Read will be back next month, and Explaining Brazil will be back next week.